the positive lagged effect, which is the V-shaped relationship, which is the V-shaped recovery that we witnessed in the economy. Now, as I was referring to earlier, correlation does not necessarily mean causality, and that is why the state-level analysis is extremely important. To show the causal impact, we need to show that other factors are not accounting for this correlation, whether it's at the country level or at the state level. Now, one of the key worries actually from a cross-country analysis is that it could be Indians have higher immunity than others. And therefore, India actually ended up having much less cases and much less deaths. It could possibly be that the BCG vaccine, that all of us have provides immunity against the pandemic, and which maybe other countries have not had. It's possible that the environment that we live in here, that is what reduces deaths intrinsically, or it could be that anything else but the intensity of the lockdown that India did actually accounts for this correlation. The strong correlation of cases and deaths that I showed across states is important in this. I also showed the V-shaped recovery. Why? Because anything that is peculiar to India, whether it's BCG vaccine, higher immunity, the environment that we live in, is common across all states in India. Take a Maharashtra, take a Gujarat, take Karnataka. These are all common across all states in India. So the correlation that we've shown cannot come from anything that is specific or peculiar to India. And that is why the state-level analysis controls for several of these other factors that may account for India's performance, and therefore actually leads the survey to infer that the lockdown had a causal impact on saving lives and on the economic recovery. In this context, it is also important to keep in mind the intrinsic effect of the pandemic itself. Even without the intense lockdown, for their own safety, individuals would not have gone out anyway. And most of us are still observing many of those precautions. Contact-based service sectors would be severely impacted. Many of us, for instance, before the pandemic, would have gone for a massage, which maybe we have not done that because it's a contact-based service. So many of us have taken these precautions intrinsically. Also, the precautionary motive to save, which is something that macroeconomics highlights, that whenever uncertainty is high in the economy, all households and individuals tend to save more, thinking that maybe we will need that saving for a rainy day. Therefore, the precautionary motive to save goes up, during times of uncertainty, and that certainly reduces discretionary spending, because households may think that if we were going to buy a car, or let's say we're going to buy a house, say let's wait out this period, maybe 6-7 months, see how the uncertainty pans out, and then we can do whatever discretionary buying. So intrinsically, again, the pandemic would have impacted discretionary spending. Further, the risk aversion and the uncertainty of demand would have also affected corporate investment, because similarly, corporates would also want to wait out and see how the pandemic spreads, how the economy performs before they actually go and make irreversible investment. So even without the lockdown, these effects would have manifested, as they have indeed in other countries which did not have as intense a lockdown early on as we had. So even without this lockdown, the pandemic would have created significant economic impact. What the lockdown did, though, was to coordinate this response across the entire country, brought awareness of the dangers of this pandemic, and that coordination is something that macroeconomics emphasizes enormously on. On the economic side, India realized that this pandemic has both demand side and supply side impact. The demand side impact, though, is very nuanced. And India's policy response took into account that nuanced effect of the pandemic on demand. On the left side, you see this chart which shows the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana balances, how they increased during the period of the lockdown. You see that the average balance increased by about 400 rupees during the months of the lockdown. Now remember, there are 40 crore accounts, PMJDY accounts, and these are accounts at the bottom of the pyramid. Typically, economists think about the marginal propensity to consume is very high for these households. This is basically jargon to say that if the household at the bottom of the pyramid gets 1 rupee, they're likely to spend 97, 98 paise. So they do not typically save as much. But even in this demographic, during the lockdown, the savings went up on average by about 500 rupees, which is illustrative of the precautionary motive to save, and thereby the impact that it would have had on the discretionary spending. And that is also being seen in the deposits that have increased, the savings that have come into the banks. So realizing that at the onset of the pandemic, when the uncertainty is very high, also the lockdown actually imposed economic restrictions, India approached this in a calibrated manner. In the first part, when the uncertainty was very high, India's policies focused purely on ensuring necessities. 80 crore people were given free food, possibly the largest free food program across the world. Emergency credit measures were given, liquidity measures were announced, and forbearance was also announced. These were all necessities from an economic point of view. And they were optimal at that time, given the uncertainty and the resultant precautionary motives to save, as well as the economic restrictions that I talked about. What India recognized very well is that pushing down on the accelerator of a car while the brakes are already clamped only wastes fuel. Only when the clamp on the brake is removed, at that time pressing on the accelerator actually speeds the car forward. And that is something that India recognized very well. Therefore, as part of its calibrated response, in the unlock phase, India has actually gone ahead and announced demand-side measures to enable discretionary consumption to come in. The Atmanirbhar Bharat 2 and 3 measures have focused on capital expenditures. A wage subsidy program was announced as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat 3, and the focus on the national infrastructure pipeline has been enhanced. So all these will go towards increasing discretionary spending in the economy. So India's demand-side response was again unique and in a more calibrated manner. On the supply side as well, and India recognized that the pandemic will have supply-side impact too, because of possible disruptions in labor markets and the financial distress that firms could have to face, which could lead to impact on the productive capacity of the economy. And therefore, a slew of structural reforms were announced to enhance supply in the medium to long run, to avoid loss of productive capacity. These reforms primarily focus on strengthening the potential of the primary and secondary sectors, and they're intended to create jobs and thereby enable aggregate demand in the economy. And as part of these, the survey details this, describes this in detail, streamlining of labor laws, the broad-based reforms in agriculture, MSMEs, the BPO in the service sector, power, mineral sector, space, defense. All these were part of the reforms that were announced as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat mission. And importantly, the strategic PSU's policy. It's a very important statement of intent. If you recall, in the last year's economic survey, the impact, the wealth creation that comes from privatization was talked about. The strategic PSU policy has actually implemented that by giving the commanding heights of the economy to the private sector. This is given the history of India in its first industrial policy, having given those commanding heights of the economy to the public sector. So this is a very important statement of intent. So to summarize, the policy response that India came up with was a mature, far-sighted one. India focused on saving lives and livelihoods, took short-term pain for long-term gain, recognized that while GDP growth will recover, and it has, lost human lives cannot be brought back. This was the humane principle that guided India's policy response. India was the only country to announce a slew of structural reforms. India's demand-side measures were also different from the other countries, were more calibrated, recognizing the simple idea that pushing the accelerator, works only when the brakes are removed. The V-shaped economic recovery, without a second wave, makes India, therefore, a sui generis case in mature policy making. The mega vaccination drive that is now on should enable this recovery, especially in the services sector. In a time like this, fiscal policy becomes very important. The second chapter, therefore, focuses on fiscal policy. The title is, Does Growth Lead to Debt Sustainability? Yes, but not vice versa. Let me start with a simple example to illustrate the main idea. Suppose you borrow and invest rupees 100, and you borrow it you have to pay an interest cost of, let's say, 8%. And let's suppose that the investment gives you 12%. The return that it yields is 12%. So you can borrow that in year 1, rupees 100. In year 2, 108, which includes 100 rupees principal and 8 rupees interest, you can repay. The return is 112, so you can pocket 4 rupees and keep it with you. But because you have actually generated more, you can do this again. You can borrow another 100 rupees and keep doing this as long as the interest rate that you have to pay is less than the growth rate that you actually can generate or the return that you can generate. And this is captured very well by the American Economic Association's presidential address that was given by the then President Olivier Blanchard in 2019, where he says that if the interest rate paid by the government is less than the growth rate, then the intertemporal budget constraint facing the government no longer binds. The intertemporal budget constraint is just basically some difficult words for what I've illustrated using this simple example, that you can keep doing this over and over again, and as long as the interest rate that is paid is less than the growth rate, This debate has happened in the advanced economies because of the significant decline in their interest rates. But the same idea also applies to India because of the high potential growth rate that we have and the fact that the growth rate is higher than the interest rate. And this idea is captured by what is called the debt equation for debt dynamics. Without getting into the math, let me just give you the basic idea that if the interest rate is greater than the growth rate, then you do not get debt sustainability because debt as a proportion of GDP will increase because you don't get enough to be able to repay the interest cost. But if the interest rate is less than the growth rate, then debt as a percentage of GDP certainly declines. And that is the key idea that is being captured here. The evidence is supportive as well. If you look at the left panel here, what is being shown is the interest rate growth rate differential at time t on the x-axis, and the change in the government debt in the y-axis. And you see that as the differential in absolute magnitude is higher, the change in the government's debt is also higher. And this is in fact coming from greater movement in the growth rate, because the difference between the interest rate and the growth rate can come both due to changes in the interest rate as well as due to the growth rate. What the chart on the right shows, that when you look at the variation in interest rate and growth rate over time, it is the change in the growth rate that is changing the interest rate growth rate differential and thereby impacting the debt to GDP ratio. And that is a key point, therefore, that it is growth that actually leads to debt sustainability, not necessarily vice versa. And this is important given the countercyclical fiscal policy that is important, has to be followed in times like these. The chart that you see on top is showing the public sector and the private sector balances. That is just sort of economic jargon for how well the private sector is doing and how much the public sector is supporting it. Countercyclical fiscal policy, essentially, the idea is as follows, that economies have peaks and troughs. When the economy is doing well, the private sector is doing well, government can step back at that time. But when the economy is not doing well, the private sector itself is not doing well, that's when the government needs to move in to actually support the...
That was the Chief Economic Advisor there giving us the key highlights of the economic survey. We're slipping into a short break, plenty more on the other side, so stay tuned.